from our last session, which is great. We're going to talk today about kind of starting that planning process for the for your course and such. And so what's a document that typically is the foundational structure for your course? What is that document? It's the syllabus, right? And so, each course is required to have some kind of syllabus, and depending on the university that you work at, there will be different requirements. So before we actually begin our discussion on what goes into creating a good syllabus, I do want to draw your attention back to our syllabus. And we had shared with you last week that this is the first time that we've done a postdocs only version of Teachers College. And so despite our best intentions, there were some wording from the old version of the syllabus that we didn't change in the new version of the syllabus. And so there's some terminology and some assignments that are more geared towards the teaching faculty. I don't think anybody in here has a teaching role or much of a teaching role right now. But if you look on the last page of the syllabus, you notice that there's a plan for spring peer observation and then teaching reflections. So those are not required activities, but if you do have the opportunity to teach a seminar, guest lecture in a class, that sort of thing, and you would like for us to do it, we can come and video record that for you. And so that way you can see yourself and critique yourself. And so that is an open invitation if you want to do that. But we do recognize as postdocs, you may not have that many opportunities to that. But if you would like to take that opportunity, you definitely can do that. Then developing your teaching seminar, that we're actually going to have a class session devoted to that. And so for all of you who wish to do so, you can develop a seminar and we'll break into groups and find different rooms and spread out, and you guys can deliver your seminar to each other just to have a little bit of feedback on how that works. So I wanted to clarify those things on our syllabus before moving on. So now let's talk about actually creating a course syllabus, and Al's got my presentation loaded. So next slide, Al. So we're going to define the purpose of a course syllabus, and we're going to identify what ought to go into a well-designed syllabus, and then you're going to ultimately, for the course that you have selected, you're going to create a syllabus for that course. Now, how many of you remembered to your first assignment, actually select your course and come up with your course? It looks like most people did. Okay, there is no penalty for not doing it, but if you haven't done that, if you would, please do that as quick as you can. So before we actually begin with our discussion on what goes into a syllabus, will you turn to a neighbor and quickly share with them what your course is, and that way it's kind of providing a little bit of opportunity for you to share that. Okay, so quickly do that.
We don't really have the capability to do that much with them.
Yeah, for you folks online, if you want to talk to yourself, you can talk to yourself. Yeah, maybe we can sit here. Yeah, you can sit there.
I don't know. What I'm going to do next time, I'm going to ask Dave and Patty to log in remotely while we do this. So you can troubleshoot for me until I get this all figured out. I don't need this enough to know.
Will you hand me those papers right there? Just stick them inside there.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe 25, 30 seconds more. Okay, so let's come back together. And as a measure of accountability, what I would like for you to do, preferably today, is if you will email Natalie, either in a Word document or in the body of an email, what your course title is, and a 3 or 4 sentence description of what that course is. Okay.
Say it again. I'll type it out.
So if you will email Natalie the title of your course, and then a 3 or 4 sentence description of that course. And Terry just asked me to take care of a little logistical thing. So we're still trying to get organized about our lunch situation. And so how many of you would like to stay here with us today if you brought a brown bag lunch? Have any takers on that opportunity? Or maybe order something. If we have on break, you could order Jimmy John's or something. So we have 2 maybe. Okay. Okay. Okay.
I need to.
Okay. So we can make that happen, and we can do that at our little break too. So in the future, we're going to try to get ourselves better organized. I think what will work out best because of the size of this group is we will plan on just staying here for lunch. And if you want to bring a brown bag, you could do it. If you want to order something to be delivered here at noon, that would be fine as well. And so we'll get better organized as we go. I believe so, yes. Yeah, because I've eaten this from before. Yeah. So, all right, excellent. Natalie? Okay. Excellent. So, how many of you, now that you hear the course that your neighbor was going to do it, how many thought your neighbor had a pretty interesting course that they're going to work with? And so that's the fun thing about this assignment is you got to pick a course that you would love to teach, and so that hopefully is going to provide you some motivation as we work through the activities. This thing. Towards the end of Teachers College, we will talk a little bit about a teaching portfolio, and a teaching portfolio is a collection of artifacts related to teaching. And so most of you probably don't have a lot of teaching experience at this point, but the syllabus you develop for this course could certainly go into a teaching portfolio as evidence of, hey, this is an example of the type of course that I know how to create. Excellent. Now, to not burst your bubble too bad, as a brand new assistant professor, you may or may not get the opportunity to teach the course that you want. You might be assigned to teach the courses that none of the senior faculty members want to teach. That's the reality of the way things work. But regardless of whether you get to pick the course or you're assigned the course, it is important to have a good course syllabus. So let's go. I would like to acknowledge Elaine Turner, who is the Executive Associate Dean for CALS. Shannon Washburn is a former faculty member here, and Mike Kane is a current faculty member here. This presentation has been adapted, involved, and handed down. And so some of the content that's in this comes from those folks, and so I do want to acknowledge their contribution.
Okay, so my question is, when you develop the syllabus, right, it's not a new course in whatever area you do the syllabus. How difficult is it to get approved for the department to teach that course?
Excellent question. And so her question was, if you come up with this great idea for this new course, how difficult is it to get it approved through the system? Now, universities have a defined system that most of the time works fairly efficiently. It can be a long process, depending on how frequently those committees meet. So there's the mechanics of getting a course approved, but then there's also the departmental politics of getting a new course approved. And those are two very different things. And so some departments are very open to, hey, you got a great idea, let's try it out, let's see if it works. Some departments are, we've been doing it this way for 30 years, it works, we're not going to change. And so that's something you're going to have to figure out. Now, most universities do offer the capability to use a temporary course number. Ours is 6905 at the graduate level, 4905, and
Or 30.
30. Anyway, most departments have a generic course number that you can use for a special topics course. And so sometimes if you're creating something brand new, you often start out, well, let's try it once with this generic course number. Let's see how the course goes. If there's a lot of interest and it goes well, then go through the process of actually getting a permanent course number. For the University of Florida, the first step is to get it approved at the department level. Second step is at the college level. Third step is at the university level. And then in Florida, because across all the state universities we have a common course numbering system, then it goes to Tallahassee for final. It's not really an approval at that point, but they have to make sure the numbers match and it doesn't replicate things, and so forth. Now, depending on your discipline, if you're teaching introductory ecology, Ecology 101, that course exists and it's probably taught at almost every university in the state. And so there is a defined syllabus that more or less encapsulates that course. But you do have some flexibility. So, did that answer your question? Yeah, good. Sure.
The teacher is responsible to develop the syllabus and approve it, or it's already a curriculum committee to approve a subject and then you have to teach it.
Excellent question. So his question was, does the instructor develop the course and then seek approval for that course, or is there a committee that kind of defines what the curriculum is and then tells the instructor what to do? And that's going to vary a little bit by program. For example, there are programs in engineering and in dietetics and in education that lead to some sort of licensure. And in that case, there's a fairly defined, at least set of outcomes for that program. And so that drives the courses that need to be taught. Some programs have a lot more flexibility in what those programs might want to look like. In that case, it's typically in a department, there's a committee of faculty that kind of manage the degree program. And that, not that they have the final say so, but they provide input into what might be necessary. At the graduate level, it's much more flexible, and if you can dream up a great course, chances are you can get that approved. There's two things that departments often look at related to that. Is they don't want replication. So is there an existing course in the department that is already covering some of that same material? Or is there an existing course in another department that is already covering some of that same material? And if that's the case, then you might get some pushback related to that. Occasionally at the college committee level or the university level, they might, if you are in port science and you're teaching and you're proposing a course that has a considerable amount of overlap with basic biological concepts, they might want you to look at what's being offered in the biology department and get a letter from that department saying, yes, your course would add to what they're doing or not, just to make that. So that's a good question. Other questions before we move on? Okay, so the act of creating a syllabus can be a very mechanistic, if that's the right word. It's a step-by-step process that you can go through. And most universities have pretty defined expectations for what goes into a syllabus. University of Florida, we've got very defined parameters, and you've got a couple of handouts. These two, I think, that are just standard stuff that goes into. That should have been laying on your desk. Standard stuff that goes into creating what goes into a syllabus. Some universities even go so far as to have templates already created where you basically just plug your information into those. And so when you get hired at a university, university, one of the things that you're going to ask is what's required in a syllabus. And so the material I'm about to share for you is based on what we require at UF, but a significant amount of that will be transferable to other universities. Let's go back to the presentation now. Okay, next slide. So I always find it helpful to begin with what a definition of what it is that we're talking about. So a syllabus is a summary outline of a discourse, treatise, or course of study. So in our case, it's a course of study. It's what is it that makes our course our course? And so that's the first part of what it is. Syllabus is the paper version of what your course is. And so if you think about communicating about your course, the syllabus is the first place that happens. Okay, next slide, Al. So it is an informative document. It gives lots of information to students. It actually becomes kind of a contract with the students. And I put that in parentheses on purpose because it's not a legal contract, but it is a way for you to communicate to the students what you're going to provide as the instructor and what your expectations of the students are. It can, again, it is the first line of communication about the students. And what I typically do with my students is if they start asking a lot of questions, I first say, have you looked at the syllabus? Because I try to do a good enough job with my syllabi that is represented in there. And actually, in Sakai, you guys have 2 examples of syllabi from the courses that I teach. Not that they're perfect and not that you should copy my format, but I find that it works good for me. And if you have no place to start, that might be a place to start. Okay, next slide. So, syllabi are required. It's, and I suspect I can say that with almost no exclusions, universities require courses to have syllabi. Now, the nature of the university you work at might provide some different flexibility, but by and large, they require syllabi. And at the University of Florida now, we require all of our syllabi to be posted on a departmental website. And so as you're thinking about your courses that you're going to develop your syllabi for, if you look on your departmental website somewhere, they should have all the graduate and all the undergraduate syllabi posted somewhere. And so that might be something for you to look at.
And on the CALS website, I'll post a link. We'll tell you a link to every department where their syllabi are located.
Okay, excellent. So that's a good place to start. And if you are thinking about the style and the way you want your syllabus to be laid out, you can look on there and find lots of different examples. Okay, next slide. So when it comes time to prepare your syllabus, you're either going to start from scratch if it's a brand new course, or you're going to start with some kind of an existing course. If it's an existing course, it should have an existing syllabus somewhere. At a bare minimum, in the course catalog, there will be the official course title and the official course description. So that's a definite starting place with you. Now, one thing to consider is sometimes, particularly at the lower level courses, there might be multiple instructors teaching the same course. And if there are 3 or 4 of you guys teaching the same course, those courses ought to look pretty similar. The syllabi ought to look pretty similar. The activities ought to look pretty similar. The outcomes ought to be pretty similar. And notice I said similar, not exact, because you do, as the instructor, you have some latitude to provide a little bit of creativity in what you do. But if a student takes Intro to Hort Science 101 from 3 different instructors, by the time that those 3 sets of students are done, they ought to have similar abilities as a result of that experience. Okay? Next slide. So this goes back quickly. Yes?
To do this, you have to coordinate with the instructor.
Excellent question. And so each department will have someone that does the academic coordination, and that will be the person that helps schedule the actual courses about when they're offered and so forth. Now, It's often the department chair that decides how frequently a course needs to be offered and assigns the instructors to the courses. But then there's typically a staff person that says, this class is going to be third period on this day, whatever, that sort of thing. Also, at that point in time, you'll also be able to identify are there other people teaching the same course that I'm teaching. Now, depending on your discipline, that might happen frequently. In my discipline, in ag education, we typically offer each of our courses once. And so I am the instructor of that course, and so it doesn't, I coordinate with the people that teach the course that precedes mine and the people that my students feed into. But in terms of teaching my course, I'm the one that teaches my course. But that'll vary depending on your situation. Uh-huh.
I have one question. So when you see your player course, but I guess other means that how does that affect?
Excellent question. So our question is, if you get a new course approved in your department, but you want that course to be available to more students, how does that work? Well, at the University of Florida, and my other experiences at Texas A&M University, unless you departmentally control a course, any student can register for your course. And so if your department offers your course, any student at the university could enroll in your course. And so once the course is approved from your department to your college, then at the university level, it's wide open to whoever you. Now, there are good things and bad things about how wide you want your course to be, how many different types of students that you want in your course. It really depends on the nature of your course. I mean, if you're teaching an advanced undergraduate course that's really specific to your discipline, that's probably only going to be majors in your department, students that are in your department taking that course. But if you're teaching an introductory or a survey course, you probably want students all over. And different universities use different mechanisms in terms of the budgeting and funding of resources on campus. It's not a direct correlation, but there is typically an association between the number of credit hours generated and the money that goes to the department from that. It's not an R of 1.0 by any means, but it does at least, oftentimes money follows students in seats. So good question. Others before we move on? Okay, so this was what we talked about earlier. You asked about approving a new course, the department, the college, the university, and then for UF, it's the state. That's going to vary a little bit from university to university, and so when you get that first assistant professor job and you have this great idea for how to get a new course approved, somebody in your department ought to be able to provide you some guidance related to what specifically is the policy of your university. All right, next down. So what absolutely has to go into a course syllabus? And so this is the UF requirements, but this will be pretty standard for other universities as well. The course prefix and title, and again, that is already created. Now for your course in here, you have the latitude to make that up if you like. The meeting times and locations. So where does the course meet? One thing for you to consider for your course, well, let me back up. So most courses are 3 credit hours, not all, but most courses are 3 credit hours. As the instructor, you might have some latitude in saying, okay, is this going to be 3 times a week for 1 hour? Is it going to be 1 time a week for 3 hours? Is it going to be 2 times a week for 2 hours one day and 1 hour the other day? That's where you can kind of think about what makes the best sense for you. Most of our undergraduate courses here at the University of Florida are either Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1 hour each time, or Tuesday, Thursday with 2 hours on one day and 1 hour on the other day. UF also uses a defined class bell schedule. The bells don't actually ring, but first period, second period, third period, there's defined start times and end times for courses. Some universities, that is not defined, and if you decide, hey, I want my class to be from 10:27 to 11:16, you have that latitude to make that decision. So that's just going to depend on the university. The number of credit hours generated from the course, 3 credit hours, 2 credit hours. Any prerequisites or co-requisites. And so Some courses, when you're setting up a new course, you can make a prerequisite to where if the student has not taken that course, the system won't let them enroll in your course. And depending on the nature of your course, that might be important or it might not be. Your name and contact information, office hours, all that sort of stuff. And then if you have any teaching assistants, their names and contact information and so forth. Okay, so that is stuff that you often find on the first page of the syllabus. This is our course syllabus, and you see that we've kind of modeled that here. All right, next slide out. So then the course description, and again, if you're working with a course that's already developed, in the course catalog there is an official description, and so you should use that. And then an overview of what and how students will learn in the course. And so we're going to define learning objectives just a little bit in the next presentation. But you ought to have some course level learning objectives about what it is. And you ought to have a statement in there about, you know, is this going to be primarily lecture? Is it going to be primarily hands-on? Is it going to be a lot of interaction? Those sorts of things. So the students can get an idea of what your expectations are. Okay? So depending on the course that you're teaching, if you are teaching a course that's required for the major, then students really don't have an option. I mean, if they want to earn that degree, they have to take your course. If you're teaching a class that is an elective, then students like to shop around and figure out what are the electives that are going to best fit their individual needs. And so they might use your syllabus as one of the ways to figure out, is the course going to meet their needs. Okay, next slide now. So course objectives, and again, we're going to talk about these just a little bit more, but these are the overarching concepts that are going to be learned. And you notice on our example syllabus in here, we've identified 9 course objectives for that. Now, how many learning objectives did I present to you last week? Anybody remember in the 2 presentations I gave last week? I can't remember exactly, but I think I probably had 3 and 3. So I probably gave you 6 learning objectives for those presentations. Well, those exact 6 objectives are not represented on this list, but they fall under some of these others. And so we're going to talk in just a little while about there's kind of different levels of objectives. You've got course level objectives, then you've got individual lesson level objectives. Okay, next slide. Then you're going to want to have a topical outline. So if you look at our syllabus in here, an example of that would be on page 2. Now, what I try to do with my syllabus, my syllabi, as best as I can, I try to make this fit on one page where it has the dates, the key topics, any assignments that are due, any required readings, and that sort of stuff. And because I find it easy for me as the instructor, I rip that page out of my syllabus and I post it above my desk, and it helps me very quickly remember where are we at in the course to do that. But again, there's no defined way to make that, so you can make it whatever makes the best sense to you. But keep in mind that it's a good way to communicate with the students. Now, this is a planned set of outline of what we want to do. Your course may not go exactly as planned. You might have to shuffle some things around. And so you always have the right to make some changes as you go. Some folks will actually build in some flexibility. They'll build in days, flex days, to where they haven't specifically identified a topic for that day. They're going to base, depending on how things are going, and so forth. So topical outline. All right, next out. And so here's an example of a topical outline for a plant tissue culture course. Pretty straightforward. The dates, the topics, the textbook chapters for readings, and so forth. All right, next. Now, syllabus components, required and recommended textbooks. Required and recommended textbooks. And so you see on our syllabus, we have the required text there. You can have anything that you're going to require the students to purchase definitely needs to be listed on your syllabus. Any other greater detail that you can provide is good as well. In your graduate classes, often the list of readings is good, and that way you can decide, are you going to provide copies of the articles to the students, either paper versions or electronically, or are you going to make the students go get those readings and so forth? You can make that decision. Okay? And if there are other materials that are required, maybe there's a special type of calculator that your class is going to require, or some special software that's required, or if it's a lab-based course, maybe there's some special safety equipment that students are going to need to provide. Those sorts of things ought to be in your syllabus. Okay, next. And this will be one of the sections that the students go to first. What criteria are you going to use to evaluate their learning? And it needs to be spelled out in a way that they can understand. Is it going to be 3 exams? Is it going to be a variety of different assignments? What portion of the grade is each assignment going to contribute? And so forth. Now, some people like to structure this in terms of points. Some people like to structure this in terms of percentages. It works out either way. It's whatever makes sense to you and whatever you can present in a way that lets you communicate that to your students. Okay, next. Then a very clear distinction of grading. And again, undergraduate students tend to be pretty motivated by grades. University of Florida, we have a set of grades that we can use: A, A minus, B plus, B, B minus, all the way down. But we have not, as a university, said this percent to this percent is this grade. And so at UF, as individual faculty members, we have the ability to determine, is an A 98%, an A minus 92%. We have that flexibility. Now, some universities, you won't have that flexibility. They will have defined that for you, and you'll have to use whatever it is.
And faculty aren't even required to use the minuses.
Yeah, so at UF, we have the options to use pluses and minuses, but we don't have to if we don't want to. And so in terms of how we grade our students, we're given a lot of latitude. But again, your first place of employment, your first university, you may not have that much latitude. And so you're just going to have to learn about what your system is. Okay, next. Look back one. Course policies. And so are there some specific things related to your course that you want to communicate, like attendance and participation? Do you require attendance or not require attendance? Do you require so much participation or not? That ought to be communicated in the syllabus. What are your policies for makeup exams or late work? If a student misses an exam, how many days do they have to make that up? If there's some in the example syllabi for my courses that are in Sakai, you can see how I've addressed that. You can choose however you want to do that. Then other things like cell phones or no cell phones, laptops or no laptops, those sorts of things. Now, for the example that you're doing here, if you want to put a lot of thought into that, you can. The reality is most of those policies come into place because instructors have had specific experiences in their courses, and they say, those kids drive me crazy with their cell phones. I'm going to put a rule in, no cell phone. The challenge is if you start coming up with all these rules, then you've got to enforce all those rules. And so that's a judgment call that you'll have to make. So, but if you want those policies in place in your class, they need to go in your syllabus. Next. Then going back to the documents I showed you earlier, at UF there is some required language. You don't need to switch out. There's some required language related to students with disabilities, academic honesty, software, campus helping resources, and our friends in the CALS Dean's office are nice enough to have written that document. Basically, we copy that and paste it into our syllabus, and we've met those requirements. And so if for our purposes in here, you wouldn't necessarily have to have that language in there, but if you wanted it, you've got some of it in there. We can link you to the CALS website to where that information is to put in there as well. But again, chances are your university will have some of those requirements in place, and so it's important that that's represented in syllabus. I guess if I were to offer a piece of advice, it's developing your syllabus does not have to be done in isolation. And so it's okay to have a colleague look at this and say, hey, does this make sense? It's also okay, when you have that first faculty position, somebody in your department will probably be designated as the grad coordinator and undergrad coordinator to ask one of those people to say, hey, I developed this new syllabus. Can you look to see, do I have everything in here that I need to have, just to make sure that it makes sense? Because, the last thing you want is to have the first day of your class when you're excited and your students are excited and you give them your syllabus and as you're going through the syllabus with them, you realize, oh crap, this is wrong. You want to catch that before you get to that point. Okay, next slide now. So other things that could go into a syllabus if you wanted to, critical dates like exams, major assignments, days when class is canceled, days that your class might meet in another location. So maybe you have a day that you're going to have your class go to the field to look at something. So as best as you can put those dates in there. A general statement about the class demeanor. What is this going to be? Discussion? Is it going to be lecture? Those sorts of things can go in there. And if you wanted to, you could put your philosophy, a short statement about your philosophy in there. It's like, hey, I really value students being able to think critically, and so I'm gonna to stress and put you guys in situations that are going to force you to think, and so you could have something like that written. Okay, next.
So how many of you noticed another place where we put some critical dates on for the Teachers College? And where do we put those? So, little clues.
Good. In Sakai.
In Sakai.
Yeah.
In the calendar.
That's an excellent thing too. And so, nearly every university, I'd like to say all, but I can't make that statement. Nearly every university is going to have some kind of course management system, like Sakai, Blackboard, WebCT, Moodle, insert title here, because they're always coming out with new ones. So your university will probably have adopted some version of that. They may want you to use that. They may require you to use that. But that can be a very powerful system for you to communicate with your students as well. I guess I can't make this statement either, but I believe that most universities still require that you have constructed a syllabus that's a single document. But there might come a time in our careers that a single document is no longer required. Maybe it's all through some sort of online platform. So who knows what that might be.
And maybe later I can run through Sakai a little bit with them.
Show them the back end of Sakai.
A couple things that we did. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. You had a question?
So how do you feel about some professors wants activity as a syllabus? I don't know. That. Second one is like what are the course notification like? And then also
Excellent question. So our questions are, and I'm repeating this primarily for the online folks. Our questions are related to bonus activities and for course evaluations. And so if ahead of time that you know that you want to structure your class where there will be some optional activities that would allow the student to earn extra points, you can certainly build those into your syllabus if you know that ahead of time, and that would be perfectly fine to do that. Course evaluations, it's going to depend on your university. University of Florida requires all courses to be evaluated, and they're done in an online platform, and all students enrolled get an email with that to them. So we don't, at University of Florida, we don't really need to put that into our syllabus. You could if you wanted to. Some universities, course evaluations might be optional, and so if that's the case, then you could say, build that into your syllabus, into your topical outline. Hey, this is going to be the course evaluation day, or something like that. Yep.
So for example, when I was teaching the sales course, I knew I had, part of the course was I needed a high school competition, in essence, I was running, and I needed judges, student judges, so I put it first day of class on the syllabus. This Friday of reading days, when I know you don't have classes, it's part of your grade, I want you to, now you can't necessarily force them to do it, but you have to signal far enough ahead that they do it so they weren't scheduling trips and other things, and make all alternative arrangements too, because that's part of the grade. So if they couldn't physically be there for some other valid reason, then I'd give them another option. So those are good critical dates, good letting them know on the syllabus.
Now, and here's the thing, and I hope this doesn't surprise you, but first time through teaching a course, hopefully you're going to have enough lead time to put some good thought into your course and developing your materials. In fact, oftentimes you can negotiate some release from teaching for your first semester to be able to do that. So hopefully you put a lot of thought into your course, and up here you say this is going to work out perfect. To burst your bubble, it's not going to go perfect. There are going to be some things that you would change, and particularly, oftentimes you might get hired at a university and they're going to say, hey, you're going to teach this course. Here's the syllabus from last time. Go for it. And if you don't know much, that will probably be where you go. And that first time, you'll probably follow that existing syllabus pretty close. And then you're going to realize, oh, that worked. That didn't work. And so I'm going to do something different. So that's just the nature of how things go. Yeah. No, great questions. And
so when you do like a new course on your syllabus, how far in advance should the department know when you're holding this because they have to do a uniform schedule?
Excellent. So her question is, if you're planning a new course, how far in advance do you need to let that happen? Well, and so there's two parts to that answer. One is, so if you want to take a course all the way through the official approval process before you actually offer the course, that approval process can probably be as short as 6 months, as long as a year, depending on timing. Now, but you can offer a course through a temporary course number, and that just needs to be done before course scheduling. Most departments are about 4 months out in their scheduling. In fact, we have already been working on our spring course offerings. I don't know when the deadline is. How do you know when?
It's coming up there.
But so they run almost a complete semester ahead of time. Now, that's not to say that if you came up with a great idea that they couldn't add the course anytime before classes start, you can add a course. What you run into, though, is students will start scheduling, I think, probably mid-October, I'm not sure. Probably sometime in mid-October, spring registration will begin. And so many students will have their complete spring schedule filled out in October. And so if you added a new course in December, students may already have a complete schedule filled up, and so it might be challenging to do that. So if I'd say, to be on the safe side, probably 6 months out. But again, as a brand new assistant professor, if they hire you and you roll into town in August and you're scheduled to teach that fall, someone else has already figured out what you're teaching and already figured out when you're teaching it. It probably has an old syllabus that you can at least start with. So, good question. Okay. Next slide now. So we talked about the purposes of a syllabus, and that being to communicate, and it's really kind of the face of your course in paper form. We talked about all the different things that might go into a syllabus, and so now ultimately, one of your assignments is going to be developing a new syllabus. Okay. Now, as you are working on your assignment in here, we are happy to provide feedback related to that along the process. Okay. So we're going to shift gears now, and we're going to talk about learning objectives and learning outcomes, because one of the first things that we're going to want to do for our courses are to identify the learning outcomes. So let's shift over to the other presentation. The handouts for both of these presentations are in Sakai. Hopefully you saw those, and so if you needed those or want those or want to go back to those, you can do so.
Right.
Yep. So developing learning objectives, and the terminology, there's not universal terminology. Sometimes it's learning objectives, sometimes it's educational objectives, sometimes it's learning outcomes. The bottom line is learning objectives are, whatever language you want to call those, are what you want your students to be able to know and be able to do at the end of your course. And so, or at the end of your lesson. So it's helping you define what is it that you want your students to be able to do. Now, there's a educational term called backwards design. Backwards design. And what backwards design basically means is think about where you want your students to be at the end of your course, and then design your course and your activities and your assignments backwards to help get them where you want them to be. As opposed to starting out, what am I going to teach the first day? What am I going to teach the second day? What am I going to teach the third day? Think about at the very end of the semester, where do I want my students to be? And then what do I need to do between now and then to help get them there? And your course level learning objectives are a way of defining where do you want your students to be at the end of your course. Later on in Teachers College, we're going to talk about assessing learning. If you've laid out good quality learning objectives, then you have already done a significant amount of your evaluation project because, for example, if you want your students to be able to develop a model of this whatever, if that's one of your outcomes, your intended outcomes, then a piece of your assessment ought to be having them actually develop whatever that is that you said that they would. Okay, so they tie nice together. Okay, so let's shift to the next slide. So we're going to identify the components of a complete learning objective. We're going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy. Then ultimately, you guys will be creating your own learning objectives. Now, how many of you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Can I show it in? So a few of you guys. I'll briefly introduce that to you today. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but if you Google that, you'll find lots of information about that. Okay, next slide. So we can think of learning in three different domains. The cognitive domain is knowledge. The affective domain is emotions and feelings. And the psychomotor domain is skills. Depending on the nature of your course, one or more of these might be appropriate. Chances are we're all going to be offering things in the cognitive domain. We may be offering things in the affective domain, and we may be offering things in the psychomotor domain. If you have a lab-based course, you're probably going to have a fair amount of things in the psychomotor. So you want to think about what are the outcomes that you want to have for your students. And as I talk about outcomes, remember that we can think about outcomes at a strategic level, like a whole degree program, a layer down at each course level, a layer down at each unit within a course, and then a layer down at each lesson within the unit. Okay, next slide. So, think, pair, share. By yourself, think about the course that you're going to design. Think about something at the cognitive level, the affective level, and the psychomotor level, and then we'll pair up and share with that. Yeah.
Some examples of affective.
So that's an excellent question because as scientists, that's something that we don't often think about. But maybe you're teaching a gen ed course, and it's that the student might appreciate the role that science plays in society, and so it's more of an attitudinal sort of a thing. Or if it, think of another example. If maybe you have something related to being able to solve problems, and maybe it's that the person learns to appreciate the opinions of others. Okay, did that help? That is one of the tougher ones. Now, our folks in liberal arts, they deal with that a lot because it's a lot of the concepts that they teach. Yeah, for the sake of time, go ahead and pair up if you've got, and just share what you've got so far.
I'm going to keep these guys working remotely. That's some type out of cognitive output. Give me your mic when we're done. take it with me for the week and see if I can, make it
And maybe she's going to adapt.
work. Yeah, that's something that I'll go to Jimmy Wisniewski and put it on him. He's a big Mac guy. I'm at always testing this.
Having trouble with this one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, about 20 more seconds.
You're typing. Let's see it.
How about you?
Okay, so let's come back together. And we've got Al asked our online folks if they would type out one. So you see a couple of examples that they gave there, which are great. And so let's have a couple more examples from in the room about either cognitive, affective, or psychomotor outcomes for your course. So who's brave enough to share?
My course title is like nutraceuticals and functional foods.
Okay.
In the cognitive outcome, they will learn the basic concepts about nutraceuticals and functional foods, and what are the bioactive components in different types of foods like fruits, vegetables, cereals, and all that stuff. And I didn't find any A-factor example, but for psychomotor learning, like one of my objectives is to utilize the concepts to make a functional food for the market. So in the end, they will, like in groups, they will create one food product.
Good, excellent. Okay. Another example? Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Yep. So excellent. Okay. And so lots of good discussion going on. So it sounds like you guys are at least starting to think about this. And the learning outcomes for your course might evolve a little bit over time as you become better at more succinctly and clearly defining what your outcomes are. Now, for your course, the course title and the course description are in the catalog. The learning outcomes won't necessarily be anywhere although at some point in time when that course was originally created, someone submitted a set of learning outcomes, but that might not be exactly the same as what you're actually doing. Excellent. Next slide, Al. So learning outcomes tell the students what your expectations are. They then help guide you to create appropriate learning activities. Then they also provide the basis for your evaluation of learning. And so in essence, they're the roadmap of your course. You've got another handout, front and back.
You going to talk about it a little bit?
Sure.
Sure.
So if we look at the side first that has the blue banner across the top,
That's a cone.
using Bloom's 2.0. We've not talked about Bloom's taxonomy yet, but down the first column is Bloom's taxonomy with a brief description. Down the second column are a set of verbs that might align with that level. Down the third column are some different activities that you might choose to use to teach that information. And then down the last column are ways that you might evaluate learning. Now, this is not 100% perfect because it can sway a little bit, but at least gives you an idea. On the back side,
That's the other one.
which is the other document, Colorado. Similar kind of a document, Bloom's taxonomy in the middle, verbs around that second ring, and around the third ring are potential activities you might use. This is a helpful tool for you to think about things and what are your outcomes. Good.
I have a question.
Huh?
So in the first row, first column, you have objective testing, like multiple choice, and dot match, right? And then of learning have different levels. So my question is, say you have a class of 100 students and you want to do an exam. Does this reflect in multiple choice kind of exam to all these levels of learning?
That is an excellent question. I'll give you the short answer today, and when we talk about assessing learning in a few weeks, a little bit more detail into that. So, multiple choice tests provide a very easy way to evaluate lower levels of learning. Well-written multiple choice tests can be used to assess higher levels of learning, but it takes a really good amount of work to create good test questions that will do that. And those are the ones you guys have probably taken tests like that to where it's a scenario where the students actually have to solve a problem or to do something, and then what they bubble in is really just an indicator of the answer that they came up with, as opposed to just being able to attend. That's a fundamental challenge that folks have in large lecture classes, and it's a fundamental challenge that some people have in online classes if you've got 1,000 students enrolled, because it becomes very challenging to evaluate student work in other ways. Later on in the semester too, we're going to have a panel discussion of folks in here, current instructors in the College of Ag and Life Sciences, many of whom teach large classes, and so you can get their personal experiences with that as well. That's an excellent question. Okay, let's go back to the presentation now. There you go. Okay, go on. So, one of the things that people often struggle with when writing learning objectives is the focus of the way that they are written. Learning objectives define what the students will be able to do, not what you as the instructor are doing. For example, my objective for today is to deliver a lecture on how to write objectives. That's not a good learning objective. That's about what I'm doing as the instructor. A good objective will be, As a result of the lesson today, students will be able to create 3 learning objectives that match the criteria given in class. That's very clearly defined about what the students will be able to do. Okay? They also will relate directly how students will be assessed. And again, we'll come back and make that connection. Next out. So we talked about this briefly earlier. Objectives can be written at the program level, like a degree program, at a course level, and then at a specific learning activity or unit level. And so what's going to be represented on your syllabus are the course level objectives, the broad objectives for the whole course. If you find that you have gotten 12, 15, 20 objectives as course objectives, you're probably going too narrow. You need to broaden your objectives a little bit. For most of my courses that I teach, I'll have 3, 4, 5 course level objectives. So you can think about that. Okay. Now, where this can get to be a little bit challenging, but I do think is important, is chances are your course fits into a degree program. Okay. And so somewhere there ought to be some defined outcomes for that broader degree program. And so periodically, the people that teach the courses in that degree program ought to sit down and think, okay, 6 of us teach these courses that all of our students take. Here are the end outcomes for the whole program. Let's revisit to see how does each course contribute. Are there overlaps between the courses? Are there gaps? That I think that Lewis is teaching in his class, he's thinking that I'm teaching in my class. In reality, neither one of us is teaching it, so our students aren't getting it. So those kind of conversations need to happen periodically. Okay, next slide. So again, be written in terms of what the student will be able to do, not what the teacher will be able to do. Next. So typically they could begin with, the student will be able to, or TSWBAT, you don't actually have to write that out. If you'll notice in the objectives I typically write, I just start with the verb. It's assumed that I'm talking about what the students are, but if you wanted to, you could write that out. The student will be able to. Okay, next. So for sake of time, we're going to skip over this, but I do want you to, at a later time, think about, so you've got your course, think about what might be a broader program level objective, one of your course level objectives, and then maybe a specific topic within your course. But for sake of time, we'll skip over that. Next now. So what goes into an objective? You should have a performance. This is what you want the students to actually be able to do. Perhaps you will have some condition. Under what conditions will they do, or what resources they will have? I'll give an example of this in just a minute. And you might want to have a criterion as to what level of performance you expect for the students. Okay? Let's look at an actual example. Using no references, the student will be able to identify 80% of the insect specimens. Okay? So my performance is identify insect specimens. That's what I want the students to be able to do. The criterion is no references. That means I want them to do this from memory. The criterion is I expect that they will be able to do 80% accuracy of that task. Now, in reality, most of the time, we really just worry about the performance that we want the students to do. We won't necessarily in each objective define. If you notice in our course syllabus and in the example syllabi that I posted online, I just give them the performance. I don't give the criteria and conditions. But you could do that if you chose to. All right, next slide, Al. So this one I do want you to do. So think about your course, the one that you're using, and see if you can write a complete learning objective. give the conditions, the performance, and the criteria. Remember, be specific and write it in terms of what the student will be able to do. Maybe another 30 seconds. Okay, so let's come back together. And I do want to share AJ. I like the one that AJ came up with up here, so I'll draw your attention to that, and I'll read it because I know in the back it might be hard to read. Be able to analyze DHPs and force canopy using an image analyzing software to calculate LAI of a force stand with 90% accuracy. So what he wants them to be able to do is analyze DHPs of force canopy to calculate LAI. I don't really understand what that means, but I'll take the word on it. He's going to let them use image analyzing software, and he wants 90% accuracy. So I might change the wording a little bit, but he's got all the pieces there. Yeah?
What's nice about that too, that you pointed out, is that you don't have to know.
No. Yeah. That is an excellent point, because remember, you're going to have your course level objectives written for your entire course. So some of the stuff that's going to come later in your course, the students probably don't know how to do yet, but you're clear with what you want them to do. Good. So can I get an example in class to share? Go ahead. Okay. Yep.
So usually
Okay.
students will do it. The curiosity
100%. Yeah. And so, again, at your discretion, you can decide do you need to give the conditions and the criterion or just the performance? And that's really up to you. For most of the time, I just give the performance. Okay, excellent. Okay, next slide now.
Leaf area index.
Oh, leaf area index. Okay. So again, the performance is always needed because that's what you want the students to be able to do. The conditions might be needed to clarify. In other words, particularly if it's with references, without references, is there a time limit? Depending on the nature of the things that you teach, there might be a time limit that they have. And the criterion, you may need to specify minimum performance. You know, maybe if you're teaching a lab-based course and one of the first things you're going to talk about is lab safety, maybe you want to have, maybe you want 100, if they're going to have to identify lab safety rules, maybe you want that to be 100%. Okay, next slide. So, learning objectives can be written at a variety of cognitive levels, higher level and lower level, and those really determine what you want the students to do with that information. And so, okay, next slide out. Oh, that is not very good on that color contrast. So you've got Bloom's taxonomy referenced in both this document and in this document. There are actually two versions of Bloom's taxonomy. The original work was done in 1956, and it's still widely used. But in 2001, a newer version came out, and it changed the wording a little bit of those. But by and large, the lower levels require just remembering and understanding it. So it's about regurgitating information on a test. It's about memorizing this information. It's about basic understanding of any given information. So those are lower levels. The upper levels involve applying that information, analyzing a situation, creating something, or evaluating something. Now, there's not a judgment to be put in place because it really depends on your course and what's the role of your course. If you're teaching an introductory level gen ed course, then this might really be where it's appropriate that you would be. If you're teaching a senior level capstone problem solving course, then you probably ought to be up here. But it's kind of a judgment call. Now, I think I've shared with you guys that I get the opportunity to sit in and watch lots of college instructors teaching, which is very fascinating. Here's a common error that I see folks make. If you talk to them about what it is that they want their students to get out of the course, they're talking about, oh, I want them to be able to analyze and solve problems and do all this stuff. Then you go and watch them teach, and they're just throwing information at the students, throwing information at the students, throwing information at the students, never giving them an opportunity to do this. And then when you look at the assessments that they're given, they're only asking the students to recall information. And so there's a mismatch between what they say they want to do and what is actually happening. So think about, in terms of what are your outcomes for your course. And if you go back to this document then, think about what are the activities that you might want to be doing and what are the ways that you might want to assess them. Okay. Next. So the level of Bloom's taxonomy that you select, again, helps you identify the types of activities that you're going to do and helps you identify the way that you're going to assess things. And as you are writing your learning objective, the verb that you choose to use is a pretty important decision because that verb communicates a lot of meaning. So that's where you can reference these two documents to help you figure out what is the appropriate verb that you might want. Okay, next slide. So again, what level is appropriate? It really depends on your course, your students, what you want the students to get out of it. Oftentimes, if you are going to use lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, you can give a lot of information in a very quick amount of time. If you want the students to analyze or create something, that's a more time-consuming activity. So that might factor into what you want to do. Okay, next slide now. So we have quickly talked about what is learning objective and why do we use them. We've quickly talked about Bloom's taxonomy. And you guys can Google that and you'll see lots of good information online about that. And ultimately, you're going to be able to start creating some learning objectives in the syllabus that you will create for the course. Okay. I took a little bit of Terry's time, and so what we'll do to make sure that we have ample time is we will take about a 5-minute break. If you've got some specific follow-up questions, we can handle those during the break. If you're planning on joining us for lunch and need to order something, this would be the time to order that, to have it delivered at noon. And so we will reconvene at 11:25. You took 20 minutes. Sorry. Yep. Well, we have a couple folks. If they want to stay, they can stay. Yep. Okay. All right, so let's reconvene at 11:25.
All right. How's it going out there?
How do you know what kind of sandwich you want?
Vito. It's Italian.
Vito?
Yeah.
And what do you want to drink?
Diet Coke. Great. Thank you.
And you got cash to pay?
Yeah, or I can just pay for it all. And I have cash. Riza, how are you? Oh, wait, do you have your microphone muted? Yeah, probably click on the phone button or the microphone button. Because I don't know if I've enabled the microphone, but I don't know if you have turned it on your side.
We have a really nice one.
Let's see. Where did everybody else go? So in the upper, which my view is a little different, on the upper side, there's either a phone or a
Hi, Alan.
microphone button. There we go. Yes. Yeah. How are you doing? Pretty well. And yourself? Good. Thanks a lot. The the audio better this week? Oh, it's perfect this week, actually. Okay, good, good. It's very nice. The only question I had, how can we enlarge the video size when he is talking? When he's talking, you want to see him more than the screen, or Yeah, I can. Yeah, because most, yeah, yeah, like So if I do this, that's you're bigger. Yeah, it's yeah. Okay. So we are not able to do this ourselves because in previous software we could do this just zoom on video, chat room, or slides. So it's not possible here to do, right? Unless I make it bigger, but I'm trying to also show the video here, the PowerPoint is that the class is seeing it, so. But I can probably, let me, go back here. If I do that, you're a little bigger now. So I can cheat a little bit that way. Let me see. Yeah, I can do that. Okay. I guess, I can tell you, like if Terry, she probably doesn't have PowerPoint, so then I will switch it so it's just her. So that'll be much bigger then. Okay, good. All right.
Yes, can you hear me now? So today, oh yes, except for first few minutes, it's perfectly all right today.
You probably don't have your microphone. Yes, I am good. I'm hearing you. Okay, good. Yeah. You're hearing us ordering food. And there's a delay for some reason right now. We wish we could be in Janesville so we can share with you. Yeah, that would be nice.
So it appears to me that if I want to teach a course, some specialized course, I must start preparing for that almost a year ago because the approval process takes like 6 months.
Go ahead and say that again. I missed part of that.
I again hear to the echoes.
Yeah, it has something to do with everybody's microphones and stuff. So I'm gonna get some tech support for next week. Here.
semester, the more difficult it is. There's a phenomenon called cognitive overload. You actually can overload the students to the point where they can no longer take it in. And you're doing yourself a disservice. It's a waste of time. If they can't learn it because you're throwing too much at them, you really haven't done any good. So it's a really good question to find out. And this may be a discussion to have with your employer, with your department. What are the expectations? And that's something I'll talk about. I'm doing this lunchtime talk at the postdoc orientation for the new postdocs. But one of the things that I talk about is don't be afraid to ask questions of your employer, whoever it is. Don't be afraid to speak up and ask for clarity of expectations about teaching, about service, about the research, about facilities, about anything. I think a lot of times the assumption is people will tell you what you need to know. That is an inaccurate assumption. They won't. They'll forget that you don't know what you don't know, and they will not necessarily volunteer information that you need. So don't be shy about asking. But that's also a very good question. I would generally tended to go with the better to ask for forgiveness than permission and design a course that I think is going to be engaging, that's going to have the students learn, that's going to motivate them, that's a good class. And if the outcomes are good and students are transferring into a major and you've got good evaluations, people won't complain. Yeah. Right. Well, this is one of these things that one of my favorite quotes I heard somebody say once, which is, if you can prepare your class, you can come to class, you can deliver the class, and it doesn't matter if there are students there or not, then you should rethink your entire approach. And this is the way, if the students know that their time in class is going to be spent in a useful way, and that you're not just spitting the textbook information back out at them, and if you design the class so that it is engaging and motivating, and the students want to be there. This isn't that hard to do. It just means thinking about why would the students want to be in this class today. Sometimes it could be because you hold a grade over their head and you say, if you're not here, I'm going to penalize you in your grade. So I do that with a class I'm teaching. I do that with a class I'm teaching right now because it's mostly guests. And so it's rude. It's rude to invite a guest and not show and have nobody show up from the class. So I say to them, this is part of your grade. I know you're adults, but part of the grade is your participation because of that. There's other ways to engage students, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Maybe one, maybe
I can add too, there's kind of an emerging approach to teaching. It's called the flipped classroom, is where, so traditionally in a classroom, the face-to-face time is lecturing, giving you information. And the students are sent home to do assignments or homework or whatever. Flipping just flips that around to where, and let me record my lectures online. Let them watch the lectures on their own time. When they come to class, okay, let's do some problems and do some activities together in class to where it is more engaging, more exciting, and more applicable. Yeah, that's it. To make it worth it. And sometimes it's going to be a challenge. If you've got an 8 o'clock in the morning class, because that's the time slot you've been assigned, and it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, Friday at 8 o'clock in the morning, not conversations, you just want. It doesn't matter how many. That's part of the reality of college students. When I taught at Madison, one of the things I did on the very first day was have a discussion with the students about what is success in this class, what is participation, how will you learn something, how will you ensure that this is not a waste of your time and not a waste of my time. We have discussion, and then I share with them, I don't control their life, and I understand that they have a life that doesn't begin and end the minute they walk into my classroom, that they have competing priorities, that they go out and party. I recognize this, and so I say, I know that sometimes you won't be here. I know that sometimes you're not going to be as interested in the material. What I noticed happen the very first year I started doing that, and it was probably my second or third year as an assistant professor, was the students stopped slouching in the back of the classroom. Sat up, paid more attention. I gave them permission to just be students, and that somehow or other allowed them the permission to also be engaged in things. I don't know exactly, some kind of reverse psychology, where they go ahead and check out of my class. You don't have to come, I don't care, and then all of a sudden they all show up. So there's ways to do it. For certain, it's a very good question, though, about getting them. And then you have to, right? You do. So that's your there's all kinds of ways to do that. This could be the topic. I keep moving that up.
Yeah. Don't stand in the light.
Stand in the light.
Don't stand in the light. Yeah.
Okay. What was the question? The question is, how do you ensure participation? How do you take names? How do you get learning? Some people can learn 100 names. Others can't. I could probably learn 50 reliably. I used to call roll at the beginning of my smaller class, which was less than 50 students, and by the end, or by the middle, I would have pretty much everyone's name memorized. It took a little bit of time at the beginning of class, but it made a difference. They knew that I was paying attention, and I learned their names. My other classes, which were for 250 students or so, we had them fill out a worksheet, just a half sheet of paper that they handed in before they left the class with their name on it, and then we just checked it off. So it was what it was, and this is getting into other topic areas, but it's they're going to multitask anyway. You heard about the cell phones, and you can have a strict policy about don't allow cell phones, don't allow laptops. That's a losing battle. It's one that you will spend a lot of time and energy fighting. However, there's a difference between the concept of divergent multitasking and convergent multitasking. The divergent multitasking is when I'm talking and they're playing on Facebook, and it has nothing to do with what I'm saying, or they're reading the paper, or they're texting their friends, and it's completely divergent from what's happening in the class. Convergent multitasking is saying, I recognize that you grew up multitasking, you're going to do it anyway, so I'm going to give you something that captures your attention and helps focus it on what's happening in the class. So when I give them a short worksheet that is aligned with what I'm trying to do in the classroom, it actually prevents their using their phones, texting their friends, playing on Facebook, reading the paper. They're actually paying more attention to what's happening. And so again, I'm not fighting this losing battle. I'm saying you grew up in a digital age, your brain is wired to multitask, but I don't value multitasking, so I'm going to impose my values on you and force you to learn the way that I learn. There's a problem with that. If I want students to learn, and if learning is the objective in my classroom, whether I agree with multitasking or not is irrelevant if it really is the truth that their brains are wired that way, then we have to go with it. And maybe one of my learning objectives in my class is my students will be able to focus on one thing for more than 20 seconds at a time by the end of the semester. That might be one of my learning objectives, but if it's not, then I can't penalize them for being who they are. So these are things to think about, at least I think about when I design my courses. And there are learning objectives like we talked about that are content-focused learning objectives, which are the ones you just designed here. There are also learning objectives, which I think you mentioned, Grady, as a whole category, but they're affective or they're behavioral. And those learning objectives, you want to think very hard about also, how do I get those happening? Because they're just as important. The students will remember those forever. And that's moving us very nicely right into what I wanted to mention for today, most particularly.
There's
So
one comment there about university level, should students be responsible enough to decide whether they'll attend class?
Right. Yeah, they should be able to. And so if they have a choice, they can decide to take an exam or not and forego those points. They're adults and they're responsible. They can decide whether they want to do an assignment or not and forego those points. If part of my class and a learning objectives is learning how to be a responsible adult and respectful of guests in the classroom, but I say you will get points for coming to my classroom, they are responsible. They can decide whether they want to forego those points or not. There is no difference. They can choose to fail the class, and I was surprised at the number of students that used to just decide they were going to fail a class, and they didn't care. So I agree completely, but I do also think that you have to be consistent across what you expect as far as points go. But what was I saying? I was moving into this idea of the non-cognitive learning objectives and the things we want. We're trying to create a learning environment in the classroom, and so what I wanted to talk a little bit about was Grady mentioned backward design. I would do just a tiny bit more mention of that that's really helpful for me is thinking about, and I ask my students to think about this, my grad students, and when I teach, the idea of a 5-year message. So this helps me start with what is the most essential and enduring thing that I want my students to get out of any given class session, out of the semester. I do it when I give a research presentation. I do it whenever I think about presenting something. What do I want people to remember 5 years after I'm done with my presentation? or my class session. It forces you to think at a different level. People are not necessarily going to remember, I'm a soil scientist also, so they're not necessarily going to remember the 12 soil orders and be able to list them 5 years from now. They might, if they become a practicing soil scientist, they might. But if I give a presentation on soil and soil taxonomy, I want them to say, wow, soil is really cool and fascinating and I had no idea, and did you know there's funny words that describe it? And 5 years from now they can remember there's funny words that describe soil, so I'm going to go look them up on Google. So that's kind of that's what 5-year message. It's very rarely about a specific point in content, and usually about a message that you want to get across. And if you design your course session, your class session around that 5-year message, or your research presentation, like I said, that comes out loud and clear. If people get the message, it draws them in. It's much more engaging than just throwing a bunch of information at people. We had another one. I used to have the students help teach a class in environmental studies, and then she wanted to do phytoremediation. So using plants to pull arsenic and toxic metals up out of the ground, harvest the plants, go bring them to an incinerator, get the toxic stuff out of the ground. Well, this is kind of a high-level thing for first-year students in a general environmental studies class. But her 5-year message was plants are useful for more than bouquets in food or corsages in food. That was her 5-year message. And the students got it, and they understood it. And so that came throughout all that. So there's ways to do it. So when I think about backward design, that's one of the main things I think about is what's my 5-year message? With papers I write, what's the 5-year message? With talks I give, what's the 5-year message? It can be a really helpful framing tool for you when you're designing this stuff. And then the other thing, I can't write on it, so it'd be interesting to write on the wall, but I would feel like a 3-year-old drawing crayon on the wall. The idea of that essential content, going back to not trying to throw so much content at the students that they get completely overwhelmed with cognitive overload, related to the 5-year message. It's this idea of what is the most essential, enduring information that the students must know. You start with that. It's at the core of what you're designing when you're teaching. What is the most important thing that they need to know about this discipline, about this class session, whatever that is. This is done by it's a couple of authors called Wiggins and McTeague. There's a whole book called Backward Design or Understanding by Design. That includes backward design, and that central core is enduring knowledge. Then you can think there's another ring out from that, another zone, which is information that's important. It adds to that central core. It's important. You want the students to know it, but it won't be the end of the world if you don't get to that. So make sure you have some of that, but don't get lost in that. Make sure you cover the enduring knowledge first. And then the furthest zone out is the stuff that's nice to know. It adds to the discipline. It sort of adds some color, some story to it, but it's really not that critical. If you have time to get there, if it adds flavor to what you're doing, great. So there's an enduring knowledge, the important stuff, and then the nice to know. And when you think about what to include in a given class session, backward design, that's backward design. Start with the enduring knowledge. Make sure you get that. Add the important stuff as much as you can, and then bring in the nice to know to add color and flavor. That's really critical. And that enduring knowledge bit, make sure you do all the good stuff from last week. Opportunities to practice, different ways to present it. That's the stuff that really matters. That's what you're going to be thinking about your learning objectives first. So that was something I wanted to say about backward design, and we're almost out of time. So I think what I might do is mention the idea of the different aspects of learning, and then if we have time later on, we can go more into it. If not, we've got a nice sheet.
You're on next week. Good.
I'm on next week. Awesome. So we'll revisit this. I'll give you the preview. So what I was saying is the whole point here is we want to create an environment in our classroom where the students are going to learn. That's the point, right? That's why we teach, because we hope someone's going to learn something. Some of us teach because we like to hear ourselves talk. And we just like to explain stuff. That's true. So teaching can be fun all by itself, but it's nice if somebody actually also learns something. So when we're creating a class for our students, we want to create an environment where they're going to learn. So we have a few minutes. I was going to ask you to think about, and I guess it's a good way to end this right now, is to think about what are the factors that influence that learning environment. So you can't cheat. You know all the answers because you were with me this summer. But think about that for a second and talk to the people next to you. I take a few minutes and think about that. Think about some of the best classes you've had and what was it about that class that helped you learn something. I'm hoping the best classes you've had were things where you learned something. Yes, sir.
Structured investment.
Structured investment. Well, I'm going to have you think about it with yourselves first. We're going to talk to each other a little bit. Write it down. What are all the different things? What kinds of things influence the learning environment for the students? And so if it helps to bring to mind a class that you've had that was successful, great. So take a couple minutes, because we have a couple minutes, and then I'm going to bring you back together, ask for your thoughts, and then I'll give you your assignment for next week. And yeah, you can talk to each other, or you can think on your own. That's okay. I'll give it back.
Better when I moved it away from the fan. I think so, then they all of a sudden they can hear you again. Yeah. You get
You
the-
can always put it over there, right? Away from the
I was wanting to be the revolving webcam.
by the end of the future college, we'll have it worked out.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get Dave with that idea to come in and help me next week. We'll get his long I've asked him to comment.
Okay, thank you. Moderating that, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Looks
but,
like it works.
engaged.
Yeah, I could add to that. Are you able to put up a PowerPoint slide and table of responses?
Yeah.
Maybe we can do that. One more now, right?
Sure.
whiteboard, but I can't teach the whiteboard versus group work. A course also has to have methods, or pedagogy is what it's called. How is it taught? How am I delivering this learning experience? Is it lecture only? Is it group work? Is it exams? Is it quizzes? Is it reading? Is it writing? What's the whole spectrum of how am I delivering this learning? So that's the second major factor to consider when you're thinking about your course. The third major factor, and I believe we'll talk more about it, I don't remember, I don't have the whole syllabus memorized, is the people. We can't forget about the people in the classroom, right? The fact that our students have a variety of learning styles, they have a variety of perspectives, personalities, they vary all over the place. Different cultures, different backgrounds, different knowledge, different interests, different religion, different everything. And the bigger the class is, the more diverse it gets. So that's something you can't ignore, is that people, students, who are they? And it's worth finding out something about them when you think about what your class is going to do. And then the other part about people that's absolutely critical that I push on a lot is yourself. I have my own strengths as an instructor. If I try to teach like Al teaches or like Grady teaches, I'm going to fail because I'm not Al and I'm not Grady. I'm me, and I teach the way I teach. And if I have no understanding of what I bring to the classroom, or what my particular buttons are, maybe I have a particular hot button when a student says a certain thing, like slang words, or there's something about them that I just don't like, I'm going to react to that, where somebody else might not. So I have to know myself and how I respond in a classroom. That's a really important piece that a lot of people don't think about. If I get incredibly nervous when there's more than 20 people in a room, I need to know that. I personally don't. I could teach a class to 1,000 students and be completely happy. But there are other people that don't. They can't. They shouldn't. We know people that shouldn't teach a class of 1,000 people. But so you've got to discover for yourself your own strengths as a teacher, your own challenges as a teacher. That's a part of the people factor that you can't ignore. And then the fourth thing we're experiencing on a weekly basis already as we're getting it worked out is the infrastructure, the technology, the mechanics. We're in this classroom. We had to figure out how to set it up. We had these tables. This is what we had to deal with because this is the classroom we have. There are other classrooms you've seen that are a big auditorium, slanted rows of seats bolted to the floor with tiny little desks. Well, what I can do in that classroom is very different than what I can do in this classroom. And so you have to think about that. The lights, the heating, the doors. One of my favorite examples was a class I used to teach where I had 250 students that had to leave the classroom at the same exact time as we had 400 students entering the classroom, and there was one door. There was no way that that class was ever going to start on time because you had this massive traffic jam of students trying to come in and out. You may think that has nothing to do with learning, but it does. How many of you have gotten frustrated, irritated, worried because you're packed into a crowded room and you're struggling to get to a seat and you're stuck in the very back and you're having a bad day as it is? Are you as open to learning when you're feeling that way? No, none of us are. I mean, we know this from research also, that when students are feeling stressed, fearful, or in a crisis, they learn differently than when they're feeling relaxed, safe, and open. We all do. It's a human thing. When we're feeling threatened, our vision focuses in, our brain is able to retain less information, and we see things differently, we hear things differently, and we learn differently. We know this. So it's part of what you have to take into consideration, all of the factors. So when we come back next time, and we'll be able to revisit this, we'll think about what are, those, having that underlying. We're trying to create a learning environment. That's what we're trying to do. And there's all kinds of ways we can do it. So we've got a couple minutes over, but thank you, everybody.
So don't forget to email Natalie with the name of your course and a couple sentences for the description. Then Terry will continue this conversation next week, and Terry will also start talking about teaching philosophy and teaching style. Your course syllabus is not due for several weeks, but you may want to get started on that while some of this is fresh in your mind. So, all right, and then
Join us for lunch next week at 3. All right? Thanks. Have a great week.
All right, guys. All right, you too, Lisa. Hey, Joe.
That would be helpful. Are you going to be? That's fine. I want to make sure.
I was able to do one of my classes. I got like 8 or 10 people that gave me their lost mistake.
That would be great. Yeah, because I haven't done it. I'm not sure if one of the like explanation. More people have done more outside.
Do that just to make sure that we
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.